about the problem we're facing today, that the water resources is limited. We admit the problem do exist, but we consider this kind of policy is not the best way. And we propose another kind of policy which can better solve this kind of problem. First, rebuttal. You said that the government decide in the first place how much maximum quotas the government will give the company, and then the company will just free trade this kind of certificates in the free market. So we want to ask, what's the uniqueness in this kind of policy? With or without this kind of policy, because we all know that without this kind of policy, the company can buy the water resources if they're rich. But with this kind of policy, the richer company can still buy the resources they really want. So which means that the richer the company is, the more water resources they will get. There's no difference with this kind of policy. So this is the main problem behind your logic. And the second rebuttal, you say that it is because so many companies, they do not need so much water, so there's a weight in those kind of small companies. But we do not see why those small companies, they do not need so much water and they still waste so much water. This is just kind of ridiculous. So let's come to my argument. My partner has already proved to you that this kind of policy, instead of saving the resources, just create so much companies to waste the resources further. And now I'm going to prove you another two bad consequences of this policy if we just have this kind of policy. The first bad consequences is that we consider this kind of policy can just create more room for the corruption and more room for the bribery of government officials. Let's compare two policies. Sit down. First is the policy of raising the prices, and the second is the policy of maximum quotas. The prices, if we just raise the prices of the water, the negotiation happens before we decide the policy. And which means that we decide the policy after the negotiation. And there is a general policy for every different companies, every different individuals, every different organizations. And after the price is decided, the price is just fixed. There's no further room for negotiations, so for the so-called gray negotiations between the government and the companies. But now let's consider the current policy. The negotiation happens before the negotiation happens before the policy as well as after the policy. There is a huge room for the company to try to seek, to communicate, to negotiate with the government, to try to maximize their resources and to minimize their cost. The government side has already mentioned that the companies are profit-oriented. What they are trying to do is to try to get the maximum of the resources using the minimum of the cost. And there are usually two ways to maximum their cost and maximize their resources. The first way is to try to negotiate with the government, try to bribe the officials, and try to get the maximum of the cost. And the second way is try to lower their cost and try to find some ways to lower their cost, to lower the usage of the water inside the company. As my partner has already proved to you, that the companies are not rational. Even though they think that, even though the cost of the negotiating with the government is so expensive, is so huge, they cannot see the tremendous effect brought by the negotiation, brought by the bargaining time. They will think that by bargaining with the government, we will only have to negotiate with one or two officials, and that does not cost us so much time. But the fact is that the cost of the time and energy of the whole company in the long term is really tremendous. But however, the second way they are trying to use is to lower the resources, to lower the usage of the resources, to lower the cost. However, the company will think that if we just want to lower the cost, we will have to do a lot of research to seek another way, to try to find another way how we can lower the use of the water and how we can just find another way to improve the efficiency of using water. And the company will just think that in the short term, if we just do so much resources and we just researches and we just put too much effort doing so, we will just lose a huge profit, which even though in the long term maybe benefit for them, but the companies just are short-sighted. They cannot see the long-term benefits, but they can only see the short-term effect, short-term harm. So that's why we consider this kind of policy can just create tremendous harms to the government, which means the corruption inside the government, and which can further just do a lot of harm to the profit, to the development of the companies. Yes, your point?
If the government have such bad negotiations, the media or other people will criticize this company, and it will bad effect on the company's credit.
But you can see in China, the current situation in China now is that so many corruptions has really happened, that there is so many gray income already exists. And this gray incomes, even though the specialists cannot define how much gray incomes the officials can get, and how can you see that the media, and even though in domestic countries, even though in democratic countries, the media and also the citizens do not have the capability and do not have the full information to supervise the government, to supervise those companies, to supervise the negotiation between the companies and the government. So that's why we consider this kind of negotiation behind the public is not justified. So that's why we consider the price, which is decided before, the price which is decided, the negotiation which happened before the policy deciding, and we can have some conferences to hear from the different people's opinion, can better serve the interests of different peoples. And the second, we consider that, as my partner has already proved to you, that we consider this is a ludicrous law for the government. Just imagine that the government now tries to decide how much water you can use and how much water you can use currently, and what will happen later. If the government, the official, we have already proved to you that there is a great income for the government officials. The government officials will find there is a huge interest in this kind of policy. So they are not willing to give up this policy after just we pass this kind of policy, because they think that there's interest inside this policy. So they will find another way to gain more profits, such as control other kind of resources for the government, for the companies, and decide the scales or something like the water is for those companies, because they think that there's room for practice.
Thank you very much for giving out the opposition. Now we welcome the second half of the debate, and first from Kyoto University.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen in this house. This opening side mainly talk about the company's overusage of water. The opposition side talk about bad effect on economy, or technology, or corruption, or so forth. Then, closing government side, I will talk about firstly how water is necessary for people to live. If without water, no one can live. That's why we think the uniqueness of water is the basis of the life. We think this is the most important issue in this debate, the nature of the water. This is not so elaborated, it's not so much elaborated, so I'd like to elaborate this point more. Secondly, I'd like to explain how the company dominates the water, and how this is have the bad effect on mainly the poor people. The poor people cannot use much water because the company uses much water and it cannot be provided for the poor people. I'll talk about in my second extension. The last extension about worldwide view. After taking the proposal, we think in the long term, the developed country, the water usage will be spared, and this water can be used for the developing country, a water shortage area, for example, Africa or so on. We'd like to talk about these three extensions. Before that, I'd like to engage what the previous speaker has said. Opening the opposition side and talk about bad effect on economy. We think that is only short-term harm, because after taking this proposal, thanks to the market system, if companies spare water more, in this case, company get more benefit because they can sell the water usage caps for other companies. We think this is simply benefit for the companies. If company spare water more, the company get profit more. That's why we think the company will have the much motivation to spare the water. Okay, moreover, we think in order to get this kind of profit, company will also have a motivation to invent a better technology of sparing water. We think this is the long-term benefit. For example, in the case of oil shock case in Japan in 1970s, in this case, firstly, the shortage of oil, the Japanese company get huge damage. However, in long term, this company try to make technology to spare the oil. Like this, the company can overcome the situation by technology. This is a good example of the enhanced technology. We think the same thing can be happen because same as the oil, the water is important thing for companies. The company will have enough motivation to invent the technology to spare water. That's why in long term the economic problem will be solved. Okay, next we talk about the corruption problem. Firstly, as I said in POI, the media or other people can criticize if such kind of vicious negotiation is carried out. This is very risky for company because once this kind of corruption is revealed to the citizens, it will be a huge damage for the company's credit. After that, the products of this company cannot sell. This is simply bad for company. The company is profit seeker. That's why this kind of action will not company do that. Moreover, we think after taking the product, of course, the company, under the after plan system, the company have to reveal how much water this company used in month or in year. In this case, the company every month, every year have to show how much amount of water they will use. In this case, it is impossible to continue to hide in long term. For example, the existence whistleblowing or so forth, that it will be revealed in long term. So this is very bad for company. That this kind of corruption will never happen. Okay, let me move on to thank you. Let me move on to extension. The first extension is about the nature of water. How water is important for people. We think that water is necessary for people to live. Without water, we cannot live because biologically. Moreover, we think if without water, we cannot cultivate any vegetable or so forth. We think that's why we think that water is necessary for us to live, like food or electricity or so forth. We think these things should be provided to every people. We think no reason cannot justify the existence of the people who cannot get this necessary thing for their life. For example, in the case of food, without food, people cannot live. So it cannot be justified